Welcome again. Now, in a bid to boost local production and stimulate the economy, the federal government is considering banning the importation of medical syringes. The Minister of State for Health, Dr. Tunji Alausa, says the government is committed to supporting local industries while urging NAFDAC to halt the issuance of import authorization for syringes, stressing the importance of protecting local industries from unfair competition.
The minister said that the goal is to shift the focus towards supporting domestic syringe manufacturing. You would recall that Jubilee Syringe Manufacturing Limited, JSM, in Akwa Ibom State, was set to shut down operations early this year before it announced restructuring its current business framework. Why hasn't Nigeria gotten its own manufacturing unit? Joining us this morning to discuss this is the CEO of FEM Diagnostic and Medical Services, Dr. Dolamud Jawando. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning.
Good morning. Now, looking at Nigeria's healthcare, medical space, and the healthcare system in Nigeria, do you think that this is a very important move to make, and is this also a right time to make this move?
Good morning again. I don't think there's a better time than now for us to backwardly integrate manufacturing in healthcare. This will go a very long way in reducing the challenges that we currently face. So I think this investment and this commissioning at this time is timely and is good response to the yearnings of the Nigerian healthcare sector.
Now, let's first of all even go back to, the whole, how is it possible that Nigeria can't even make syringes? Where, what exactly are we lacking, that makes us import syringes?
Consistent government policies is what we are lacking. Because it might also interest you to know that between 2013 and now, we have commissioned about 8 injectables manufacturing plants, across the country. In 2013, we launched the International Integrated Medical Company under the Pan-African Health Foundation in Rivers State. That was launched, that was commissioned, and that was novel because that was even producing disposable needle and syringe, non-reusable, which was also reducing chances of infections, because if needles are being used multiply, they can transmit infections. So we're having needles that were just for one use, and after that is also disabled. So we're manufacturing that in Nigeria. And just like you said in your intro, Jubilee 2 was launched. That was an investment of about $25 million in 2017. And, it was sad for us to wake up to hear that they were actually leaving the country. But the question we need to ask ourselves again is that when one company is leaving, why is another company commissioning? Why is another company coming up? So this tells you that if you look at the numbers, it's always better for us to produce locally. So we are currently producing needles and syringes in Nigeria, but not in the right quantity.
That's another thing I wanted to ask you. And I am totally in support of us pushing homegrown remedies for homegrown problems. But right now, with what we have and the reality of what is on ground, can what we're producing be able to meet up with the demand, or do we have enough demand to match the production, whichever way? So do we have enough production to match the demand and vice versa?
We don't have enough supply to meet the demand at this time because the production is still in phases. For instance, the Afri-Medical that was commissioned by the Honorable Minister a few days ago has the capacity to deploy about 1.8 billion needles annually. And the Nigerian syringe and needle expectation use is about 1.5 million needles and syringes every day. Because, needles are used across different strata in the healthcare sector, from taking blood samples for investigations, from using it to transfuse drugs into patients, also from using it to give injections to patients, also from using it to perform other procedures in surgery. So there are multiple uses of needles and syringes. So we don't have enough to meet the demand. Having said that, if we have an industry that was commissioned that has the capacity to generate, to produce about 1.8 billion, our annual use will come to about 600 million needles. So not only would we have enough for local use, we would also have to be able to export.
Yeah, you've spoken about government, being intentional about it, and of course investments that are necessary. But, there could also be the arguments that you may not even need, to go that far, with simple healthcare infrastructure, being on a certain level, these things, could easily be produced. The people would even argue that even universities, research laboratories, should be able to have little investments here and there where these things are produced. So, is that also, one of the challenges, that we don't even have the most basic infrastructure that would support, that level of, local production?
I wouldn't say we don't have. We have to a certain extent. What I would say is that it is not adequate, because we also need to congratulate ourselves in the areas that we have been able to make investments. Let me circle back to 2020 when the COVID broke. Some of us were on the front lines at that time, and I did realize painfully that in the management of COVID, only two things that we were using were local. And the only two things that were local in the whole chain for the COVID management was the doctor and the patient. Every other thing used in the treatment of COVID, in the diagnosis of COVID, were all imported. And that was why we're globally waiting for anesthesia machines from all over the world to come into Nigeria.
And so that includes face masks.
And even face masks, yes. And but today we now have companies manufacturing face masks in Nigeria in multiple quantities. We now have companies in Nigeria manufacturing hand sanitizers in multiple quantities. And so we're now having another company making a launch into the injection and needle and syringe market. So I think this is quite encouraging. This is not to talk about the other manufacturing and assembly plants for diagnostic machines and also local fabrication of machines. So these things are going on. So what we need are policies that are consistent. I like the fact that you mentioned the universities are supposed to be able to do this. Policies drive these things in universities. It's not just easy for us to say the university should do this. How much funding is the university getting? How much investment is it getting in terms of research and development? How much acceptability do we have as a people to locally manufactured goods? These are the things that we have to look at.
It's one thing for this to be said. It's one thing for the government to say we intend to do this. We're going to stop we're going to stop importation so that we can push local manufacturing. But another thing is the practicality of it in the shortest possible time. So, how soon do you see this happening? And I'm asking this as well because we've seen a number of big pharmaceutical giants leaving the country because running a business in Nigeria is not an easy feat, especially in these days. So what's the practicality of this going to look like, and in what time frame do you see this happening?
Like I said, let's pick the last company that was commissioned a few days ago. It has the capacity to produce 1.8 billion needles annually. Now, that company is going to have the same challenges that every Nigerian company has. It's going to have the challenge of power, the challenge of electricity, for instance. How does the government want to assist this company? How does the government want to support this person? How does the government want to support this endeavor to be able to make it a lesser burden on the manufacturer? At least if we look at the multiple advantages of local production, this would go a long way. So that's what I was talking about. It's about the passion and the drive and the consistency with local manufacturing. This would go a long way in helping us. So it's not just for one person. It's all hands have to be on deck for us to produce more of the things we need.
I'm hoping that we have, a health ministry that, I've been talking about KPIs lately. So I'm hoping that we have a health ministry that also sets some of all these things as its KPIs. We want to see that in the next 2 years, we've moved from this level, and this is where we are now. This is where we look to be in 2027. Those type of conversations are what I think we should have. And of course, it should include things beyond syringes. So from your perspective, what else do you think that, Nigeria's health, industry maybe also needs this level of attention, into with regards to production? What else do you think we should completely stop importing? We can absolutely produce here that the primary healthcare centers and the healthcare space, desperately needs more of.
It might surprise you to know that materials as simple as gloves, materials as simple as condoms are still being imported into Nigeria in large quantity. These are investments that should have been made years ago because we use a lot of gloves in Nigeria and we also use a lot of latex condoms in Nigeria. So this is an area that is untapped, and this is an area where investments need to slide into to be able to ensure that we are making great progress with locally available devices. And even up to the dextrose that we use, the normal saline that we use, we're actually producing, but we're actually still importing a lot. What I think is very important is that I think Afri-Medical needs to launch a foray into the companies that have come and gone before them. What were those challenges? And they have to have a clear roadmap to be able to surpass these challenges when they come up, for them to be able to do great work. I like the issue of KPIs, but I think 2 years is too short. And if they're having a roadmap that can last about 20 years with proper monitoring, proper research, proper development activities going on in that space, not only would they produce needle and syringes, they would also produce a lot more byproducts. And that way, there would be a more concentration and traction into local manufacturing of consumables in Nigeria.
Yeah, I only use 2 years. I only use 2 years as an example. You definitely,
yes,
require more.
But what happens again is that most people set up companies and have a 2-year plan for a break even. It doesn't work like that in real life. It doesn't work like that even in this particular economy, whereby we're all on learning, relearning, and learning new things on how to survive in this economy. So the same thing has to be put into infrastructure for healthcare as well.
All right, even as we talk about the exit of certain big pharmaceuticals, the brain drain is something that cannot be overflogged, because it's the reality that the Nigeria's healthcare sector has to deal with every day. I want you to give us a picture of how this has impacted the health sector, because when we talk about it, people every day we're talking about people jackpying, right? But give us a picture of what it looks like for Nigeria's healthcare sector.
All right, so I work in the diagnostic sector, and I got a call from a patient who does their annual medicals with us yesterday and said, what is happening? I was at one of your branches. I'm seeing new people at the front desk. I'm seeing new people in the phlebotomy. I'm seeing new people in the customer care. Is the jackpot syndrome also affecting you? It's affecting each and every one of us. It's affecting both the junior and the senior doctors in Nigeria. It's affecting in fact, when we talk about the 5 M's of management, we talk about manpower. So if manpower is deflated, if manpower is reduced, if manpower is overstretched, if manpower is overwhelmed, it will be very difficult for the other 4 factors of management to be able to come into play, to be able to give us the kind of outcomes that we're looking for. So I don't have all the answers regarding how to retain medical talent in Nigeria, but I think something at a level higher than mouth service ought to be done here for us to be able to get what we desire. It's a time bomb waiting to blow a lot of things up, and nobody will be saved. Because if you remember what happened during the COVID, we're all locked in, and the doctors were locked out, and we could see the casualties that happened. So I think we shouldn't wait for the next pandemic before we start to make the right investments in human resources for health. It's a very, very big problem.
Yeah, hopefully, from the way that it has been described, it might take a while before we get to a level where we can be, sustainable, to some extent, if there's a pandemic in the next couple of years. So I don't know if we're going to be ready. But I want to ask, same question, or just from the question my colleague just asked, why are you still here? Why haven't you joined the thousands and thousands of others who have left the shores of Nigeria to practice outside? And then also, what would be your recommendation if you would speak with the Minister for Health, or even the Commissioner for Health in your state? What recommendations would you give, to see an immediate change in our story?
The recommendation that I would give to the Health Minister is for them to pay attention to the human resources for health. Not just doctors now, but the whole strata. Nobody has paid attention to this sector for very many years, and this is why the problems have always come from here. If you have manpower in place, and you have the appropriate technology in place, the outcomes will be phenomenal. But when you don't have the adequate manpower in place, even if you make all the investments, it will end up coming to waste, because you won't have people to manage, you won't have people to drive it, you won't have people to supervise it. So I think if they fix the human resource for healthcare problem, which is a human resource problem, which has to do with incentives, which has to do with motivation, which has to do with training, which has to do with capacity, which has to do with investment. Another thing I'd like to say is that when we start producing medical consumables and medical equipment locally, we would be widening our skill gaps as local people. I'll give you an example. In the laboratories sector, prior to COVID, only about 50 Nigerian medical scientists knew how to operate molecular machines in the molecular lab. But all the tests for COVID were all molecular science and were all based on advanced technology. Today, we have thousands of medical laboratory scientists who have developed the skills, the capacity to be able to run molecular tests. So just before COVID, we're exporting a very large number of investigations outside the country. But with the arrival of COVID, sadly and not too badly, we had to survive, so we had to make the appropriate investment. So I think if we pay attention to the human resource for healthcare, it will go a very long way in solving the problem. And why have I not jackpot? Of us were born by Nigerians. And when I say Nigerians, I mean we saw our fathers labor for Nigeria. We saw our fathers try to build the infrastructure in Nigeria. We saw what our parents labored for to be able to put things in place. And I think they didn't finish the work. So for some of us, it's a duty, it's a passion, and it's the love for country that's keeping us here. And against all those as entrepreneurs, we're still pushing and giving our best. But we do need a lot of support. We do need a lot of support.
In response to that, we want to say thank you, Dr. Dolamu Jawando, not just for joining us on the show, but for still showing up regardless of all the challenges it takes to run a business and to be a medical professional in this country. So thank you, because we need you and the likes of you to still stay healthy. So thank you.
All right. Thank you very much,
Thank you, and have a good day.